Okay, so all I'm doing is showing you different types of backgrounds to begin to experiment with. And all I'm showing you right now as I flip through this book is using Distress ink sprays, choosing your colors carefully because you work with them while they're wet. And of course, colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel will turn it to gray or mud, what we call mud. So you want to be careful about that and only work with secondary colors. And if you're going to add a complementary color opposite on the color wheel, you want it to dry before you add that complementary color, just so you know. But this is just the sprays, once dry, adding a light stencil on top of it. And you can see how varied they get. A paintbrush with a color. This is just turquoise paint and magenta paint on top of the background. So experiment with your backgrounds. Know that when you start to really work with backgrounds, you want them to be a little bit different, which is one of the reasons why we brought in the texture pages to make. This is very much like the texture pages, just slightly different. See how cool, that's a cool background for a tarot card, for an oracle card. It's got color, but yet it's got enough space in it with a stencil that you could put your design on it. This one's wild. I like to do wild things when I'm working big, but all I'm doing is showing you a couple of examples. Okay, so I was getting a little more muted because I was thinking, all right, so backgrounds for oracle cards. You don't always want it to be bright and beautiful. You do want it to be subtle. Isn't that soothing? It's just two colors. It's just two colors. And then the stencil is a third color. Now this is getting crazy. This is if you want to go into bringing in more geographic into your background with spots and dashes and lines. And this is some of the pigment paints, watercolor paints I work with. They're so vibrant and beautiful. And don't forget, you can always use a brayer to roll your colors. You don't have to have every single speck of space be painted. This is a distressed look, but it's also a grunge look, and they add a really cool effect. This is just more of the same. I was actually testing my watercolors and then I realized, oh, this is some cool backgrounds. So if you want predominantly white, don't forget you can just make squiggles. So it might be worth spending a day, one experimental day, just making in an art journal book. Look at how beautiful that is. Do you know that's just one color paint mixed in with gesso and painted down? Gesso with one color paint mixed together, brayered. That's beautiful. It's simple, it's easy, but it's not just a blank canvas. So experiment with it, you know, really experiment with it. All right, so got a couple of things here to show you as alternative backgrounds. You can do something like this also. This was a huge sheet, one of the 22 by 30 sheets. And all I did was take, this is watered down acrylic. All I did was wet my paper with a spray, and then I just made sweeping, gestures, just like we do in intentional creativity for anybody who's in it, Color of Woman. And I made just big slashes. And then what happens when you break them up into your cards, if you do it as one piece and then glue them down to your canvas, you've got the same color theme between each one. This is just different parts. These are called soul cards. They're just different parts of the, sorry, I have one side that's that of this, but they're so different. They all are different, but they're the same piece of paper, the same color theme. Okay, some are more inviting than others, but they all end up with a common look. See that? And all you did was make one big page of the same thing and then glued down, you know, grit it up and then cut it down and then glue this as the foundation on your card. That's one way to do it if you want total continuity. Here's extra leftover cards. But see how beautiful they all are? And they're all cut out of the other half of that, well, in the bottom half. So that's one way to work with the background. If you want a common theme and you don't want to spend too much time on backgrounds, because there's nothing wrong with not wanting to spend a lot of time on your backgrounds. There is nothing wrong with that. Or if you say, okay, I'll use mine as an example. I've got 5 goddess cards. So I'm just going to do the same background for all 5 goddess cards. They'll be easy to identify. And then I'll look at the card and I'll know, oh, that's a goddess card. Which goddess card is it? Oh, there, this one's spring, this one's summer, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So you have a few special cards, make them stand out with maybe the same background. I'm going to show you how to do this technique real quick. All right, these are gorgeous backgrounds. Again, you're doing one sheet and you're cutting it down into several. It gives continuity. I have 2 sheets of paper here. All I did, just like on these, I'll pinpoint it, I'll point it out. This is on black paper, this is on white paper. They're bright though, they're very, very bright. But something like this also could become a really cool idea for your back card, for the back card that's going to be the same on all of them, and then you're going to just add the name of the deck. And maybe not even that, but they would all be the same. So it's really, 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 really simple. In fact, it's so simple that you're going to be making this for other things. All right. So I'm just using gray paper. I'm not even worried about it being anything thick or heavy because I'm going to tape this on. I'm going to glue this onto my canvas, whatever it is. And if this ends up being my back card, the back side of my cards, I only need to make one. And then I don't even need to glue it down to anything. I just need to scan it or photograph it only one time because I'm going to use the same thing on the back of all my cards. Okay, so this is kind of like, don't get swept up in this, but you can start playing now. All right, so what I did was I used a jelly plate. If you don't have a jelly plate, don't worry. You don't need a jelly plate. Okay. These were done with jelly plates. So I did what's called 2 colors for the jelly plates. And I did all my stencils with the jelly plate on these 3. But on this one, all I used was a brayer. Does everybody know what a brayer is, or do you need to see a brayer? You know what a brayer is? Okay. You can even do it with a brush. The main thing is you want to be sloppy with it. You don't want it to be perfect, and you want it to bleed out and fade out on the edges. 2 colors. That's all that's in this one, with a little bit of another color. This is what I cleaned my brayer off with. Simple. All right. Second step, once this dries, second step, all you're going to do is find a stencil. Let's find a stencil. Here, I'll work with bubble wrap, and I'll work with the stencil. And I'll work with, I have these out. You can work with acrylic paint where you're working with here, let me grab one. See? These are our little sponges. So if I was working with paint, I would just dab it and I would make sure it's not thick. I would wipe it until it's just coated but not thick. And then I would hold it down and be rubbing it in place. But I'm not going to do that. Or maybe I will. I don't know. We'll see. But let's try one of these first. I'll bring in a pink. Let's see what I have. Green. Let's see if the yellow will work. They might not work. Sometimes these guys don't work with stencils because the stencil's too deep. It looks like it's going to work. All I'm doing is going over part of the stencil. Okay. Don't worry about how it looks. That's not the point. You're just getting a pattern down. You can turn a stencil over when it's done and you can wipe it on like this. This is not a finished product at this point, so don't worry. You just want some patterns and designs, okay? You can use this bubble wrap too. You don't need a lot. You don't need a lot. All right, let me rip this open. The bubble wrap is on the inside. If you work with soft, gentle colors, you get a soft, gentle background. All right, so here's a bubble wrap. These aren't really up. Hold on a sec. Where'd my bubble wrap go? I had a different bubble wrap out that I was working with.
You know what's funny, Kisma? I actually use bubble wrap to do my backgrounds too. That's so funny.
It's a very common mixed media tool. So you want to make sure your bubble wrap has a lot of air still in the bubbles. That other bubble wrap I grabbed was not so good. Okay, let's bring in a light color. So it's just giving a really pretty faint impression. You see that? It's just faint. These are just accents. Okay. If you wanted to, you could come in and you could do a stamp, you know, with a stamp pad. Here, we'll add just a little bit of lettering to this. I may not do this, but I'm just showing you examples, okay? See how faint I'm getting it? So I'm not doing a lot of pressure on it. I just want a semblance of words coming on. See that? Okay. So I'm going to blow this dry, so I'm going to mute my mic for just a sec. Okay, so then all you're doing at that point, once you have a design like this, all you're gonna do is you look at it and you begin to pull out the patterns. You pull out the patterns. So you pull in your pens like Poshka pens and markers, and you begin to outline things. And you bring in color. And more color. And you bring in metallic pins. And you basically just keep going until something inside of you goes, I think that's enough, right? You can keep going on and on and on, but, and this is a quick, hasty, doing for it. But if you're just enjoying it and taking your time with it, you can see just how beautiful, really, something simple like this can be. Now, this is all acrylic, but this one is is watercolor and some acrylic, like the Posca pin is acrylic, the Stabilo, of course, and the metallic. Those aren't going to bleed. But if I were to start adding something else on top of it, it will bleed. So what I'm going to share with you today is if this was all watercolor. So if we were doing it all in watercolor, right? If we were just designing it and we had it all going in watercolor, this is the same thing basically, but just with nothing but watercolor. Then we would take this before doing, once it's completely dry, and we would work with a product called Fix It. Okay? And anything that's watercolor in mixed media that you are going to add another layer on top of, and you make watercolor your foundation, you want to secure it, you want to fix it. This is only something you would use outside, but I'm just gonna spray a corner. I'll just spray this right here just to kind of give you an idea, because I want to take it all the way to the last step for you. Okay, so you give it a spray like that. And you let it dry, and it does take a minute to dry. Don't blow dry it, just let it dry, air dry. It dries pretty quick, but and I don't know if you can see it, but it does leave a little bit of a sheen. You probably can't see it on the camera, no. It leaves a little bit of a sheen on top because it has sealed it off. If you don't add this next layer, anything you put on top of it will not stick. So make sure you do this final step if you know you want to add more paint on top of this. You're going to take your clear gesso and you're going to paint your clear gesso on top. Once you've got your clear gesso on top, then you're going to let it dry and it's workable. And I'll show you the difference. So you can see how nothing has smeared, right? Nothing smeared. If we were to come over here to this side, well, I think I'm using only, here, I'll use the corner of this. This is all watercolor. So if I didn't have Fix It and I'm coming on top of it, I'm gonna get this wet and then it'll, if I add another or something, it'll start to smear. You don't want it to smear. If I bring any more water on top of it, it's gonna start to smear. See that? So that's the secret to working with watercolor as a base. Fix it, dry it, clear gesso it, and then you can do anything. So then imagine here, it's all watercolor. You've got it fixed, you've got it clear gessoed. Now you can cut it up into the size of your background or your background card. Okay, fix it, clear gesso, let it dry completely, and then you're ready to go. If you don't want it so bright, because you're going to use it in your card, then what are you going to do? You're going to fix it, and then you're going to wash it with white gesso. White gesso mutes and puts it into the background. So here's just white gesso, right? Right? Oops, oh my God. Did you see how much I just poured out? I poured out way too much. Ah. Well, leave it to me to fumble this. Hold on. See how it's, I didn't fix this, so see how it's already blurring? It's interacting with the blue background, believe it or not. But you just do a light layer of it. And I'm going to blow dry, so plug your ears. Here, I'll mute my mic. Okay, so this is a muted, pushed into the background. If it were really bright colors, it would be muted. You'd still see the bright colors coming through. This is pretty calm, so we're only catching glimpses of it. Then what I would do is I would take a color wash. So I would take one of my acrylic paints that I really, really wanted, and I would water it down and I would wash over that. Or let's say this was a color wash. Let's say this, I'm gonna just use it because it's the only thing I have right here. Then I would just go over it with a wash. And what's gonna happen as a wash, this is pretty bright, but you can see you can do it on the clear gesso even. So then you can see that there's a color, but you can see the colors underneath it. So this is with the white gesso down and this is with the clear gesso down. So there's ways to work. Nothing is ruined. Nothing is ruined. If it's too bright, you put it back into the background with clear gesso or white gesso, depending on its brightness. And then you can always put a color wash over it. So there's some samples of ways to work with things. But when you take your time with this technique, you're really going to get some beautiful stuff out of it. Okay. I am going to stop the recording of this for the demo now, okay?